all these payments are highly confidential, obviously. And as you say, we wrote a story saying that up to 12 million was paid, and we said this is to Virginia Giuffre to make the case go away. Queen around 7 million, 3 million from Prince Philip's, late Prince Philip's estate, 1.5 million from the King, which is not, we haven't had an official statement denying it, but there's palace sources saying, well, about the 1.5 million. But what's wrong with paying that money out? Virginia Giuffre needed compensation.
Well, I mean, my only thing I sense here is if you see those films like, Henry V, and they're charging down and the King's there in the battlefield, and it's like, protect the King. So what they're doing here is effectively, with the great sadness and great respect to Her late Majesty, she's no longer here, nor is Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, to defend himself. So what they're doing is the courtiers, they're protecting the King. That's what's going on here. He knew nothing about it. Well, let's just hope that in the millions of documents that come out in the next however long, that they are not proven to have got that wrong, or that they have told the absolute truth.
I don't think that, the royal family throwing in the money for this settlement, yes, it's a terrible look, to really just put it mildly. But with that said, we come into this a lot with these royal family issues. It's also a family, but also, of course, the late Queen was the head of state. So, okay, yes, we need to look at it in terms of following the money and making sure there's not a cover-up. Back in 2022, when this was all playing out, it was the Jubilee year, there was a lot going on. As a mother, again, if he was looking her in the eye, I mean, none of us really bought his story in the Newsnight interview, but he was presumably lying to her in exactly the same way that he was lying to everyone else. As a mother, she would have wanted to believe him. He didn't have the means to pay for it himself, apparently. And therefore, I think on that level, people will fundamentally understand why they've chipped in. I don't think that's necessarily the damning part. We are also moving into awkward territory with all of these details now because, of course, the late Queen, after a whole lifetime of service, yes, Andrew was a blind spot, for sure, for all of her achievements. I think this is the one that was the blind spot. But she's not around to react now to the new allegations. We don't know how she would have reacted now with all of the evidence that's come out and the leaked emails, etc.
This is a really important point because my understanding is Andrew told his family exactly the same story that he was telling everybody on Newsnight, which was, I cut off all contact. The minute that the stories dropped in the Sun on Sunday, the Mail on Sunday, on the same day, revealing that he had emailed Epstein afterwards, that's when the royal family reacted, and that's when the King...
Which is fair.
Yeah.
That's where I always come back to. You have to assume that he was telling them exactly the same story, as you're saying. And therefore, you look at their reactions in line with that. And that is also why I said just earlier, I think now that we do know so much more and there is evidence of it and his word has been proven to be false on so many of these topics, now they have to go in as hard as possible because now they do actually know.
The question, what did the Queen know, refuses to fade because it sits at the crossroads of power and morality. When someone reigns for 7 decades, their silence becomes as meaningful as their speeches. Queen Elizabeth II wasn't just witnessing history, she was shaping the rules by which it was managed, delayed, or quietly absorbed. This isn't about gossip. It's about how long-term power trains people to normalize discomfort when it threatens stability. The monarchy doesn't reflect reality, it filters it. By the time sensitive information reaches the sovereign, it has often been diluted, reframed, or stripped of urgency. This isn't accidental. It's survival strategy. The crown was built to withstand scandal by slowing it down, which raises an uncomfortable possibility.
Well, now, actually, the problem they've got, and it's because it's under a police investigation, it has to now be left to the police investigation. And I suppose that's probably why the King would just say, look, we're going to cooperate with the police. And it's almost in a way, it's you really wouldn't want to be those police officers, because now you've got this team of police officers and the CPS. They're going to have to do the most thorough job because the police will be criticised if whatever happens either way. They'll say, well, it's a cover-up if they don't charge somebody and actually interview people under oath. Or they'll say, then they can be blamed for all the fallout. And their senior officers, after all, the police, are part of the service on behalf of His Majesty the King. It's a real problem for the British establishment, this. And this is because there's so much involved in terms of You know, we had a scandal in the church with abuse, and the Archbishop of Canterbury lost his job. You know, we've got Mandelson now. You know, we don't know where that's going to go, but there's going to be a parallel link there with the Andrew one, because if he goes to prison or he has to have a case brought against him, people are going to say, well, Mandelson's had a case against him. What about Andrew? So there does have, as we started to say at the beginning, there has to be accountability. And that's what the problem the king has faced. He can't really do an awful lot more than he's done at this moment, apart from go on the television and say, I can assure you we will be accountable and we will make sure that we cooperate in every way, and tell people that there obviously things have gone wrong in the past, and we'll make sure we'll be as transparent as possible going forward. He is in a problem because now it's over to the police.
And also it's the King's courts, right? So if this
That's
now,
right.
I'm not a lawyer, but if this goes through the courts, I did think
Well, they
that
can't
with his
interview
statement.
him. I mean, the Queen couldn't give evidence on the Barrel trial.
And he could also, that's why I think also in the statement, I will say, would have been tricky, the wording, because if it does then get prosecuted, surely whatever he's said in a statement, look, legally it gets quite messy.
Well, lawyers are very clever people. Remember in the Barrel trial, I remember covering that trial. You were probably both very young in school. But I remember that was such a shock when they did the deal, essentially because the Queen, the monarch, remembered that she'd said something to Burrell, apparently, allegedly, and that she'd told, and the king, the current king, the Prince of Wales, you know, passed that on, and as a result, you know, they couldn't bring a case whereby Her Majesty would have to be brought to her court to give evidence in her court in a criminal trial, so the case collapsed. Now, is that going to be the same with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor?
Well, the point about accountability is not necessarily the royal family and king's accountability, it's Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. That's the accountability we're talking about. So are we going to see, you know, as I say, the police, the royal family have said that if approached by Thames Valley Police, we stand ready to support. Are we going to see Prince Andrew interviewed, arrested, in handcuffs,
Well, it
jailed?
can't just be Andrew. It has to be the king. It has to be Amanda Thirsk, his private secretary, all members of staff that work there. They have to hand over emails that are interacting. It's a huge, real problem for the monarchy, because this, unlike we live in this 21st century where so much information comes out, the younger people, you know, are far cleverer than me they're getting information from all sorts of places. It's not like the abdication crisis where the papers were delivered with bits cut out so that they didn't talk about Wallis Simpson and the king. They actually would serve in papers with lumps of bits cut out. That's how ridiculous it was. They know what's going on. They want to know more. And if there's any hint of a cover-up, it's both the case of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Yes, of course, he has to answer questions. But the whole institution does. People that worked for that institution, people whose salaries were paid for by the institution. This is, and there will be whole loads of emails. And the problem you've got here is this institution, I've covered this story for 36 years. They're a very secretive organisation. They do not answer under the Freedom of Information Act. The Official Secrets Act is quoted at you every term. They don't discuss security. And when they're getting things that are not quite working for them, they whisper in friendly journalists' ears to actually put the other side of the story without actually denying anything. So therefore, those sort of games are going to have to stop, and they're going to have to actually be they're going to have to change. They're going to have to be a far more transparent.
Even when truth was present, it may never have arrived in its raw form. There's a myth that ultimate authority comes with ultimate clarity. In reality, it often comes with isolation. Advisors exist not just to inform, but to protect. And protection can mean deciding what a monarch doesn't need to know, or when they don't need to know it. That blurred line between shielding and enabling is where legacies begin to fracture. Prince Andrew isn't just a controversial royal, he represents a structural dilemma. What happens when personal loyalty collides with public expectation? Monarchies aren't built to abandon their own easily. They're built to endure embarrassment quietly, hoping time will dull public outrage. But this time didn't cooperate. One aspect rarely discussed is the human layer. Was the Queen acting as a monarch or as a mother? Those roles are supposed to be separate, but in a hereditary system, they are permanently fused.
Accountable institution.
Amen, Robert Jobs. Completely agree. On the point of accountability, Bronte, is Andrew going to, face some kind of justice? Does he deserve? I know the police have said that they would need a bit of time, and as Rob's just outlined there's a lot of things for them to go through. But is Andrew going to face this accountability?
Well, firstly, I want them to take the time that they need, because this does, for all the reasons you've said, need to be meticulous. This has to be done so carefully. Andrew is now facing allegations, very serious allegations, with evidence compiling of misconduct in public office. He's facing allegations of being part of an industrial-sized sex trafficking ring. These things have to be answered to in a very serious way, and as we say, with investigations. And I don't think people will settle for anything less, nor should they. There's an idea of this entitlement, and I mean this in terms of Andrew. He's the poster boy for it at the moment in the royal family, in that there is this idea that there's one set of rules for him and one set of rules for everyone else, including people like Mandelson. So he needs to be answerable. This absolutely has to be taken to the nth degree, but it must be done very carefully. And I think that the time for him just being pushed off to the side now is over. I think we spoke a lot about this last year, before this latest pile of documents came out. And I did say, yes, he's gone now. He's living on private property. He's not any burden on taxpayers. But that's changed now. I think now it absolutely has to go further. And I think that people will not settle for anything less.
The emotional cost of that fusion is often hidden behind protocol and ceremony, and history may not be kind to decisions made at that intersection. The Queen ruled in an era where discretion was admired, but the audience judging her legacy lives in an era where silence is suspicious. That generational mismatch is critical. Actions that once signaled dignity are now interpreted as avoidance. Legacy doesn't just age, it mutates. When people say the monarchy's legacy is being rewritten, what they may really mean is that it's being rebranded by public memory. History doesn't change facts, it changes emphasis. And today's emphasis is accountability, not endurance. That shift alone may be the most destabilizing force the monarchy has faced in decades. The Queen mastered the long game, waiting out crises, trusting continuity over confrontation. But the long game only works if future generations accept the same rules.